When you want to set your team up for success and help them achieve their goals and quotas, sales training can seem like a really good investment. But the truth is, most sales training is completely useless. I mean, how many times have you or one of the members of your team attended a sales seminar, left feeling excited and motivated, but then you get back to the office and nothing really changes? If this has happened to you, it's not because something is wrong with you or with your team members. It's because sales training fundamentally, most of the time, does not work, which is a little unsettling given that companies spend $70 billion a year on sales training. That's billion with a B. So what can you do to move the needle and help your sales team succeed? Join us for this episode of Sales Fiction, where I explore the 3 things sales training must include in order for it to be effective. Welcome to Sales Fiction, a podcast that helps small sales teams get big results. I'm your host, Christy Lawrence, the founder of Mighty Sales and a longtime sales professional who traded my corporate sales career to help small but mighty teams do more with less. Each week on this podcast, we separate sales fact from sales fiction so that you can hyper-focus your effort on the skills, strategies, and tools that will have the biggest impact on your bottom line. Let's dive right in. First, before I dive into this, I want to say that I absolutely love learning. Learning is one of my core values. And even with that, I cannot tell you the number of times I've personally read a sales book or attended a sales training and heard about a sales technique or a sales script that I wanted to try, that I was super excited about, that I was confident was going to make an impact for me when I was carrying the bag. But then when I got back out into the field, nothing changed. And I know I'm not alone in this, right? When I was carrying the bag, I'd go to national sales meeting, hear a different way my colleagues were approaching sales conversations, and be fully committed to doing things differently when I got back. But then I didn't. And the same was true for a lot of my teammates, right? We stayed stagnant. Nothing really changed. We kind of kept going through with our same routines. And I'm willing to bet that the same thing happens to your team, that you hire a sales trainer, you have your sales team read a book, you have a conversation about it, people share their takeaways, and then 2-3 weeks later, nothing's really changed, which can be frustrating. And for me, someone who loves to learn, who does sales training as part of my career, it's a big deal for me to say that most sales training truly is ineffective and a complete waste of time and money. And there's a lot of reasons why this is actually true. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's important to understand that habits are hard to break. And when your team has been in sales, oftentimes your seasoned team members, even your team members who have been in sales for 2 or 3 years, they've developed a set of habits. They've developed a set of routines. They've developed a set of approaches that they're comfortable with. And to break habits requires being out of your comfort zone. And so even though intellectually we want to change and we want to grow and we want to evolve and get better, we bump up against our habits and our comfort zone. So that is the first thing. The second thing, and I have talked about this before, is that when you're learning something new, you're going to go into a phase of conscious incompetence where all of a sudden you're trying to do something different and you're not as good at it. It feels stickier. You don't find the words, right? Maybe you had a certain question or a way that you approached a prospect initially, or your team members did, and you're trying to develop a new technique or teach them a new technique and coach them on it, and it doesn't come as naturally as the old way. And so when things are uncomfortable, we default to saying, this doesn't work for me. This doesn't fit in this scenario, where that might not actually be the case. The case might actually be it does work, but it's uncomfortable and doesn't feel as natural. And we want to get back to what's natural. And the other thing that's really important to know is that we're bumping up against habits. We're bumping up against the challenge of learning new things and having to actually go through being uncomfortable, not being good at something when we're learning something new. But then we're also bumping up against relevance. When we're hearing different techniques, different approaches, when we're doing things like role-playing things, we're doing these in idealized scenarios. And The real world of sales conversation, it's never an idealized scenario. So, right, you're going to get objections. You're going to get pushback. You're going to run into things you can't anticipate in training. And so then it's just, okay, let's go back to what you know, what's comfortable. And because sales training oftentimes doesn't navigate the unknown very well and teach people the skills around that, it often feels like it's not relevant to day-to-day life. And this is important because if you're going to invest money in growing your team, you want it to stick. You want to set your team up for success. And you want to be able to look at the numbers at the end of the quarter and at the end of the year and see improvements so that you're not wasting everyone's time. But here's the thing, the biggest opportunity to develop your team comes from practice, not from training. So fundamentally, you absolutely can teach some foundational techniques in training and some scripting in training and systems and frameworks in training, but learning happens during practice, not in training. And this is why most sales training doesn't work, because it doesn't take the time to actually apply what's learned in real world scenarios. I'm not talking about role playing. I do role playing with my clients. It is a first step, but it is not the most effective step, because role playing is where you're going to run into scenarios that aren't based in the real world. And so you're going to go back and it's not going to feel like it makes sense. There's too big of a jump. I want to talk to you guys about this. I have a client and we do live practice sessions with real clients, which I highly recommend, because then you're actually practicing in the real world, not a made up world. And we were doing a call session recently, and in 2 calls in a row, we ran into really highly unexpected scenarios. In one, the customer that we were talking to for cross sells and upsells shared that she had just lost her spouse. The very next call, the customer that we were talking to shared that he was going through a really hard divorce. Those aren't things you're going to practice in a role play scenario, but those are the types of things that salespeople and your sales team members run up against in the real world, which is why often sales training doesn't feel relevant, because it doesn't take into account the personal factor of what your salespeople are challenged with on a day-to-day basis. So if you're not giving them tools and support to navigate the real world, you're going to be missing the boat. All that being said, then what do you do? How do you actually help your team grow, give them tools, give them training, give them practice that's going to stick? I want to give you 3 tools that you can implement to help your team practice sales in a safe and effective environment when they grow, and to help learn and apply frameworks and techniques that will help them succeed. So the first thing is, whatever you decide to do, it needs to be consistent and continuous. Training is not a one-time event. Practice is not a one-time event. It has to happen on a consistent and regular basis. If you are a professional singer, you don't go to rehearsal one time. You go to rehearsal night after night after night. And that is where sales training often misses the boat, is it's a one-time event that happens maybe once a quarter or once every 6 months. That is not going to create behavior change that sticks, no matter how good that training is. So your training absolutely must be consistent and continuous. The second thing that needs to happen is your training needs to be relevant and customized. It's not enough to give your team a script or a framework and say, go apply this. You need to get feedback from your team that is talking to customers on a regular basis. Here's the framework. Here's why we're doing this framework. Here's how to utilize this framework. And then ask, what about this framework do you feel like won't work for you? What do you not like about it? Get their feedback and use that feedback to customize the framework to the scenarios they are running into. This is going to make a huge difference in their buy-in and in their success. If what you're training isn't relevant and customized to what your reps and your team is facing on a day-to-day basis, it is not going to succeed in the long term. And the third thing that your training absolutely needs to be making sure that you're hitting the mark on is ensuring that you're giving feedback and coaching. We don't want people practicing the wrong things over and over, or we just get better at doing the wrong things, right? Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And we're not shooting for perfection here. We're shooting for improvement. And the art of giving feedback is a whole other topic We'll actually talk about that next week because it's so important and a lot of people miss the boat. But if you are not giving real feedback, constructive feedback, relevant feedback that can be adapted by your team members on a consistent and continuous basis, you will not see the impact from the training and the effort that you're putting into the learning. One of the biggest challenges that salespeople have when it comes to adapting to new training and new techniques and new learning is not being held accountable for applying the skills that they are learning. And that is where feedback and coaching is so critically important. So to wrap this episode up, if you want your sales training to have an impact in 2021, if you want to get your money's worth, if you want to get the value out of the time and the investment that you're making, you absolutely must ensure that your training is consistent and continuous, relevant and customized, and provides consistent feedback and coaching to your team members. Next week, I'm going to share a little bit more about the art of giving feedback that sticks and how you can do it in a way that people hear you and don't shut you down. It is definitely an art, but it is one as a sales leader that you must master if you want your team to be successful and continue to grow. So join us next week for that. In the meantime, if one of your goals is to develop your team in 2021 to really help them break through and consistently hit their sales goal, go to mightysalesteams.com. That's mightysalesteams.com and schedule a 30-minute consult where we can evaluate your current training plan and curriculum and give you a roadmap to make impact. Again, that's mightysalesteams.com. If you liked this episode, make sure to give it a 5-star review and subscribe to Sales Fiction so you get fresh episodes downloaded as soon as they're available. See you next week.